You mentioned before your opinion on the models of today versus 90s, 80s models and the impact on fashion shows. Could you expand on your thoughts of today's models and their place in fashion? Oh, that's a really good question. I think my frustration in terms of models today is that they don't necessarily seem talented. Like models before, yes, they were, beautiful, although I think that has changed. I think before is that you had to be conventionally beautiful, which is why there were some dodgy conversations being had, like the black models that used to get signed back then had to have very specific European features and stuff like that, which is really problematic. But outside of that, they could walk really well. It feels like they took their jobs more seriously. They were more committed. They really understood designers' visions. They were friends with designers. So there seemed to be a better collaborative effort between models and designers, whereas now I feel like, and in the video I made, there was a good comment talking about the casting agencies, because now there are the casting agents in between these models and designers. So that relationship and that chemistry isn't built. And you can see that on the runway because these brands just go to casting agents that cast a random set of models every season, unless the designer specifically wants one model to be on the runway or one of their friends. And nowadays, anyone goes on the runway, not just models, but like VIP customers or celebrities that are associated with the brand or friends of the designer and all that sort of stuff. So it just seems like overall, models being part of it, that fashion today is a bit more lackluster in every way. The imagery seems a bit uninspiring. I mean, look at that grey Vogue cover that came out not too long ago. Everything just seems a bit uninspired. It's almost like fashion as a whole, when you look at every corner, whether it's the quality of the garments or how well the models walk or how seriously the models take it, every aspect just seems to be going downhill. So that was kind of where the frustration started from. Let's see. It feels like Alex Consani got to this position because she's super loud and extroverted. I love her, but that's the impression she gives me. I think Alex is like a really good model. I don't think it's because she's loud. I don't think so. Because her being loud has nothing to do with the imagery that we see. You know what I mean? And I think she's looks good in imagery. So I don't think it's because she's loud. I think maybe her personality is why she's famous in terms of why she's so big on TikTok and stuff. That's definitely true. And that you can't negate that having a big audience helps you be more sellable, I guess, and a bigger catch to brands that are trying to push as much engagement as possible. So that's definitely part of it, to be honest. Do you have any thoughts on the industry resorting back to extreme thinness on runways and away from the body positive movement? Yeah, I find it weird. Like I posted a video about modeling not too long ago, and I remember some of the comments were around the fact that plus size models aren't real models and all that sort of stuff, which shocked me because in the fashion industry, when we say plus size models, I think people who everything in their mind is extreme, they might think a plus size model is someone that's a size 40 or something stupid like that. But in fashion, actually, what people call plus size models are models that are actually smaller than the average size of men and women. So most plus size models, especially the big ones, like the famous ones, are actually smaller than the average size in like the US or the UK, right? So I find it weird that models don't reflect how people actually look. And also that people have decided that being crazy thin to the point where sometimes I've literally worked for brands and been on set where models have fainted because they've been malnourished, because their modeling agencies, I don't know if they still do this by now, because I feel like there'll be so much backlash if this still happened. But when I first started working in fashion, people from modeling agencies would measure the waists of their models and make sure that, I think some of them had like monthly check-ins, would make sure that their waists are a certain measurement. And some of the required measurements, these models literally did not eat. They were malnourished, like to the point where their health was literally at risk. And for some reason in fashion, we think that this is okay, or this is normal, or this is beauty. I don't get it personally. And I think it's kind of bad that we're going back to this extremely thin thing in fashion. I think it's really problematic, to be honest. I don't know why people always like extremes. Like, why do people always have to focus on the extremes? Let's see. Luke says, I don't think the point of modeling is to be representative. It's to be the model, i.e. the ideal / aspiration. But who is aspiring to that? Like, maybe because I play sports, I've never wanted to be like runway models that I see on the runway, like ultra skinny. If I was as skinny as a runway model, when I play rugby or basketball, I would literally get folded into 10 pieces if I wasn't the size I am now. So who aspires to be ultra skinny though? Like, do people actually aspire to that? Because I know people always say this, like the goal of a model is to be aspirational, but who's aspiring to that? I don't find that stuff really aspirational. Like, as a guy, I don't want to be skinny. I want to actually be able to lift things. You know, let's see. Most people aspire to that. Really? So most people aspire to being like ultra skinny. That's really strange. I think there's nothing wrong with being skinny. I just personally don't aspire to it because I'm someone that has played sports my whole life, and it's not beneficial to be ultra skinny with the kind of sports that I've played my whole life. Like, my size is always an advantage. Like, when I play basketball, I barge people out the damn way. Or like when I used to play rugby, I used to smash people out the way. So if I was skinny, then then I wouldn't be able to do that. But I guess in fashion, everyone wants to be skinny because the goal is to fit into clothing, I guess. Like, fit into like smaller clothing. So people are really obsessed with being skinny. It's like the whole Karl Lagerfeld, Eddie Simon thing, right? But I don't know. I find it strange. I find the whole thing a bit strange. I don't know. I find it weird. Especially because a lot of like runway models, like the really big ones, are actually lower than a healthy weight. So why do you aspire to being unhealthy? Strange. Someone says anything over 20% body fat is not that healthy though. I think it depends on like your body type, but definitely like over 30%, like health wise, probably quite bad for you if you're like over 30% body fat. But that's not what we were talking about. We were talking about like models that aren't malnourished, like models somewhere in the middle, like models that are below the average size of like the average person, which is a healthy weight. We weren't talking about, you know, people that are literally like 40% body fat. Let's see. I used to, in the 2000s, it was the only type of body visible in media. Was literally bullied at elementary school because I was no model. Maybe it comes down to your like, I'm not like singling out you, by the way. I'm just saying that maybe what we aspire to comes down to how like we grew up. Because when I grew up, when I was in school, I was skinnier than I am now, but I was never like stick thin. And I guess no one cared because I just used to play sports. So no one cared. I had like an athletic build. So people were more like, well, he just plays sports. So that's what people that play sports look like. So it wasn't really like, no one ever cared about the way I looked or my weight or ever commented on it, to be honest. All people used to talk about was, oh, like great game last week. That's what people used to say when I was growing up. So maybe it's down to like what has been said to you or like what your experience is when you grow up. That's interesting though. Let's see. Misbehave says there's a whole trend on TikTok of guys wanting to fit into size 26/28 Japanese denim. That's so interesting. Do you know what's funny? Like, that's so interesting. At the skinniest I've ever been, I think the smallest at the skinniest I've ever been in my whole life, and this was literally, I'm talking like when I wasn't even an adult. So this is like, I could never fit into stuff this size ever again because my body structure is bigger, like my skeleton is bigger. So maybe when I was like 14, 13, I used to fit into like waist size 34s. And I've not been able to fit into anything less than a 34 since I was like 13 or 14. So that's crazy. But then again, I'm like taller and bigger. But I always think of like size 26. Like, how tiny do you have to be to even... If I was like 5% body fat, I think the smallest waist size I'll be able to fit into would be a 34 or max a 32. To fit into like a 26 is unfathomable. Like, how could you possibly fit into a 26? Damn, that's crazy. That's actually crazy. That's wild. Luke says, I think that a lot of designers genuinely believe that clothes naturally look better on slender frames. That's definitely part of it. I think that the thing that we used to say about models earlier on, like, we used to say that models are like human hangers, like the really skinny models, because they don't have like a bum or necessarily big hips or necessarily big boobs. So everything just goes down flat. Like if you were to put clothing on a hanger, like there's nothing pushing it forwards or backwards. So people used to say that like clothing looks good on those models because it looks like a hanger. Like nothing is like moving, it looks flat, basically. But I don't know if I necessarily agree with that though. Like clothing looks good because it looks like it looks on a hanger. I don't know. I think it's easier for your clothing to look good on a model that's really skinny, because then you have to account for less things. Because when people are not like ultra skinny, their actual like body proportions start to show. So some women are, let's say, top heavy or bottom heavy, and then it becomes harder for designers to like accommodate for those things, especially if they are like using grading and stuff like that. It doesn't work out that way. So it's not easy. I mean, I don't have all the answers. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club, where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.